Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard, learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude.
Welcome. Today, I am speaking with Jay Lee. Jay's a Christian blogger and host of the Daily Sabbath Podcast. He has a passion for communicating God's word in a way that is simple and relevant. Jay enjoys engaging with diverse audiences across the lines of ethnicity, culture, and theological beliefs. He served as a pastor for over 13 years. Jay lives in Southern California with his wife and 2 daughters. He is a huge basketball fan and never met a cinnamon roll he didn't like. Amen. Me either, Jay. They're
Nice.
all
Kindred
delicious.
spirits.
Yeah. Welcome. Thanks so much for taking time to speak with us today.
Well, thank you, Amanda, for having me. This is actually the first time I've ever been on the other side of the table as a guest instead of a host. So I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, no way. So what do you think about that? How do you feel?
Yeah, it's definitely a different experience. Not kind of, as the host, you're sort of like the caretaker. You take care of the other person, and you want them to do well, and so it's kind of funny being on the other side, just like Amanda, take care of me. So,
You
but
got it.
it's
Well,
good.
we know each other well enough. I think, you can trust that. We met each other actually virtually, as people do during the pandemic, walking out our ministries, and have become really good friends and support one another. So absolutely, I'm here. I'm cheering for you. And I also have a gurney ready if you need it. I'm good.
Nice. Yes, you're going to hear it all today.
Well, good. That's what we want to hear. So, you know me, and anyone that's listened to the podcast, I always like to start at the beginning and get like a holistic view of your life. So, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. I am born and raised in Southern California, Orange County. So I'm Korean American. My parents immigrated here from Korea probably about a year or so before I was born. So I was
Mhm.
born here. And so I was born and raised in Orange County, California. And actually, the city that I grew up in is called Irvine. And
Mhm.
Irvine I kind of compare Irvine to, if you've ever seen this movie, Pleasantville. It's a little bit
Yes.
like that. Yeah, where I believe Irvine was voted like safest city in America several times, right? So a
Wow.
very kind of just kind of safe, a suburban upbringing. My family where I have one older brother and mom and dad, and my mom and dad they love each other very much, and even though they might bicker when you see them, they have been married for a long time. They've done business. Basically, they spend every single day, pretty much every moment of every day together for I don't know how many years. Do business together and being at home together. So family life was always actually really great for me, and my parents went to every little league baseball game I ever played.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was a very comfortable upbringing.
That's awesome. And it sounds like a beautiful way to grow up. My parents just celebrated their 67th anniversary.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
67. That's amazing.
Yeah, they bicker too, but it's because, you live with anybody, you
Yeah.
bicker a little
When,
bit.
when you've been married, when you've been married a certain number of years, like that, I mean, to the outside people, it might feel a little uncomfortable, but that's just normal communication.
Absolutely. It's a love language of its own.
Yeah.
Um, so it's so cute that they dress up for each other even during the pandemic. It's just they're really beautiful. Now, your parents owned a business, right? When you were younger?
Yeah, they actually owned several businesses. I would say that they're almost and maybe it's more coming from my dad, almost like serial entrepreneurs or serial business owners.
Okay.
Yeah. So like my dad, I don't know if this is a thing where you're from, but we used to have these things called drive-through dairies. And so my dad, he used to own a drive-through dairy when I was growing up. And it was pretty successful, I think, which is why we lived in Irvine. Irvine is kind of well-to-do
Hmm.
city in Orange
Hmm.
County. Like when I was in high school, all the kids were driving, BMWs and Mercedes Benz, right? Like our high school
Yeah.
parking lot was ridiculous.
Wow.
So yeah, so he owned that drive-through dairy, and I think he did very well. And so we lived in Irvine. At some point, he sold that business, and to tell you the truth, I'm not actually even sure why. I think it might have had to do with the long hours, or I remember a
Hmm.
couple times he came home after being robbed, so maybe it was too
Oh,
dangerous. I
wow.
don't know. But
Yeah.
for some reason, they sold that business. And then after that was basically just kind of a string of businesses. They owned a Korean restaurant, then they owned a sandwich shop. And then the last business that they did like a linen service where they rented out like towels and aprons and things like that
Oh,
to
wow.
restaurants. And so yeah, so they've owned a lot of businesses together, but none of them ever were as successful as that dairy. I think once we sold the dairy, it was kind of a struggle after that
Yeah.
financially.
Yeah. Now, you had told me during our pre-recording call that you were actually a latchkey kid. Now, it doesn't sound like it was a very scary neighborhood, but
Yeah.
did you feel safe and secure?
I mean, I think for the most part, yes, in the sense of I think all of my friends and their families were also kind of like immigrant families, and it's pretty
Yeah.
common for both. I mean, you don't have to be an immigrant to have two working parents, but it was pretty common to have two parents who were working a lot and the kids
Hmm.
sort of kind of being on their own after school and things like that. So I felt relatively safe, but yeah, at the same time, there were definitely I was also like, kind of scared of the dark at different
Hmm.
times, or, there were a lot of days where basically my babysitter was the TV,
Yeah.
and, kind of I would be watching TV. I mean, I would be watching TV for long hours, and, from when the sun was still up until, the sun went down, and, the house would be dark because the light, the sun went down while I was watching TV and I didn't turn on any lights. And so I'd be too scared to like get up and turn a light on, So, I mean, there are definitely moments like that where it was a
Yeah.
little bit scary to be home alone.
I remember that. I remember because back when I'm 57 and back in the olden days, it was okay to leave your child alone for a few minutes. It's not,
Yeah.
doesn't seem okay anymore, but I remember being very afraid when I was alone.
Hmm.
I'm not someone who is afraid of much anymore. I really don't think anything scares me, but I remember those feelings. And
Yeah.
yeah, and all that TV watching probably helped you prepare some of the different things that you've done and all of your speaking, whether it be as a pastor or as a podcaster. It's amazing what God uses that
Uh-huh.
wasn't even something that was dedicated to Him.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I always tell people I really feel like watching so much TV like helped me with my language skills and helped me with my speaking. So you're the first person I've ever had say that to me where they're like, "Oh, I bet you that helped you with your speaking and things like that." So that's definitely a great insight.
Yeah, well, when my son was little, he had the most amazing vocabulary, and we
Mhm,
we spoke using a lot of different vocabulary ourselves. But he did watch a good amount of TV, not a ton, but the
mhm.
shows that he watched, he really got stuff out of, and I attribute some of the things that he does and is able to understand to television. If you're watching what the kids are watching, there's really good stuff on there.
Yeah, definitely for sure. Though they weren't watching what I was watching, but yeah, you're right.
But it's funny how, I mean, you have a really nice diction, you have a really great sounding voice, and I think it's perfect for podcasting.
Oh,
I think anyone can do a podcast, but certain people have like a rich tone and a good delivery.
oh, well, thank you very much. I've been telling people that, I mean, honestly, one of the things that held me back from trying to do a podcast for a while was like, well, I don't really have a podcast voice, so couldn't really picture myself doing a podcast. So it's funny to hear you say that.
No, you really do have a podcast voice.
Thanks. I will receive that.
Okay, good. So, when you were in middle school, your parents ended up running into some financial trouble
Yes.
and your house was foreclosed on. I mean, I can only imagine what that must have been like. Would you
Mhm.
be willing to share a little bit about that time with us?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So like I said, once my parents kind of, once my dad sold that drive-through dairy, it was really kind of financially always a struggle after that point. And so, I mean, I was in elementary school and junior high during those years, so I didn't have like a strong sense of what was happening, but I had a somewhat of a sense that we were, having some money problems.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it was the summer in between eighth grade and the start of high school. And there was one day specifically where, I was in my room watching TV. I think I was watching Punky Brewster. Not that that's relevant, but yeah, I was watching TV, and there was a knock at the door, and I was kind of somewhat clocking what was happening, but not really. But I could just hear, my parents were at the door talking to somebody. I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but at
Hmm.
one point, I do remember hearing my mom starting to cry, which is highly unusual. I think I've only heard my mom cry maybe two or three times in my life.
Wow.
And so I
Wow.
could hear her, kind of crying.
Hmm.
And then basically at some point they came into the room and they said, hey, we have to get out of the house. And basically, they gave us like 15 minutes to gather some belongings, and we had to get out of the house. And we were being walked around the house by a police officer. And
Whoa.
yeah, so
15 minutes?
yeah, something like that, 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
And so, we just walked around and picked up some clothes and things like that, and we had to get out of the house.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You must have been kind of numb. I mean, that's not
Yeah.
something you would expect to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, I had some sense that we had some money troubles, but I had
Yeah.
no idea about something like this, right? And so it was
Right. Right.
definitely a rude awakening. Like I would say that that's probably one of the first times in my life where, like you kind of, as a child, you sort of have this idyllic view of the world, right? And
Hmm.
that might have been the first time where it kind of tasted some of the harsh realities of life, right? Where it's like, oh, things
Yeah.
like this happen in life. And so, yeah, we walked around the house and gathered our belongings. And at that time, it was kind of an unusual situation because the business that my parents were doing at that time, they were actually
Hmm.
running out of the garage. And so basically, we had to get out of the house, but they allowed us to remain in the garage at least for some period of time,
Oh, wow.
because that's where the business was. So, during the day. So basically, we got kicked out of the house, and then we were all three of us. My brother was, I don't know where he was. Maybe he was working, or I don't know where he was that day. But my mom and dad and me were basically just in the garage after being removed from the house.
Wow. Were you able to stay in the garage overnight or where did you go?
No, so basically, so we went into the garage, and at that point, my mom, she, uh, after well, first we got into the garage, and obviously, I just started bawling.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, my mom, she looked at me and she was kind of like, as she was trying not to break down herself, was like, okay, don't cry. Right.
Yeah.
So, we're trying to gather ourselves here in the garage. And at some point, I mean, my dad had to get to work. So my dad just starts working. My mom, she went off and, she had to try to find an apartment for us to move into basically that day.
Mm.
Actually, now that I recall, we did stay with some family friends for a few days, I think, while we were making the transition. So, but
That's
my
good.
mom went off to go apartment hunting, and then, it's summer, so I don't have school, so I'm just sitting in the
Oh,
garage.
wow. Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for kids your age. And that's such a tumultuous time already, just in being an adolescent, getting ready to go into high school. Did you
Mhm.
worry about what other people thought? Like, what were your
Mhm.
thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said earlier, I think I was kind of numb, and I think I just didn't know exactly what was going on. But I do, one other thing that kind of stands out in my mind that from that day is, so we're just sitting in the garage. My dad's working,
Hmm.
and at some point he wanted to take a break, so he stepped out of the garage and you know pulled out a chair and is just kind of sitting on the front porch of the house. And basically, I didn't want to come out of the garage. I guess I
Mm,
was embarrassed or something, but I was just kind of staying in the
yeah.
garage. And so my dad, he looked at me and he was like, "Hey, you don't have to be embarrassed. Just come out here and sit with me, you know?" So, yeah, I think I was pretty embarrassed,
Hmm.
but at the same time, maybe didn't have a full understanding of what happened.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. What was it like that he kind of called you over to be with him? Did that feel reassuring?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like a contrast, right? From like when we first got into that garage and, my
Hmm.
mom basically saying, "Don't cry." And I don't hold that against her. Like I said, I think she was just trying not to
Yeah.
fall apart herself, right? And so seeing me crying was only going to probably make her fall apart. So you kind of have the contrast of that, like, don't cry, to, hey, don't be embarrassed, like, okay, yeah, we got kicked out of the house, but don't be afraid, don't be embarrassed, just come out
Yeah.
here and sit with me. And so I feel like it was I don't know. I don't know how much I was processing these lessons in the moment, but
But as I was
those two
listening
things.
to it, that's what I was hearing, that yeah, it might have started off with like the worldly, don't cry, hold it together, but that it became about what was most important, relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I definitely appreciate, in hindsight, I appreciate that moment. I appreciate my dad kind of,
Yeah.
just kind of, hey, you know what? We don't have to be embarrassed. Come out here.
So where did you eventually move to?
Yeah, so we ended up just moving kind of across the city, which, Irvine is a surprisingly large, geographically a large city. So we
Hmm.
moved to the other side of Irvine. And so, I mean, we're still in the same city. And, it's kind of like one of those things where in hindsight, it's like, oh, I mean, it was only a 10 or 15-minute drive from where we were at. But as a kid, it felt like we moved to just a completely different, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like we
Different
moved into a different
country.
world. Yeah,
Yeah.
different country where,
Yeah.
I was gonna, like I was about to start high school. And so I would be going to a different high school than I had
Mm.
expected to, a different high school than my friends were going to be going to. Fortunately, I had one friend who did live down there, who I was able to connect with. But yeah, basically, it was like, you know, uh, it was like I said, again, in hindsight, it's like, oh, we were only 10 or 15 minutes away from our house. But as a kid, it was like I instantly lost all of my friends, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
drive. I'm not gonna like, and we didn't
And
have social media.
when you're a kid, you don't know that. I still remember moving to a different spot only 5 minutes up the road from where I grew up once I was
Mhm.
a grown up, and realizing there was this whole other world in this Willow Grove area on the other side, about 10 minutes away, that we just never went. It just wasn't part of my rabbit trail,
Yeah.
And I think as a kid, you don't think that way. You don't realize there's that much past your own little world.
Yeah. And I mean, it just feels like you're living in a completely different country or something like.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the way that it felt. And I, immediately just lost contact with all of my friends. And, it
Wow.
was just like, yeah, just starting a new, a new life at a new school, making new friends.
Were you an outgoing person at that time in your life?
Not really. I think I've always been actually pretty shy.
Yeah.
Probably doesn't seem like it, but I've always been pretty shy. And so, no, I wasn't too, yeah, yeah, I was pretty reserved.
How was it making new friends? You at least had that one contact. Did they help you?
Yeah, so that definitely helped the transition where, he was a good friend too. So, we, rode our bikes to school together every day and,
Oh,
had some
awesome.
classes together, so I definitely think that, like, if I didn't have him as a friend, I literally would have come into the new school not knowing anybody. And I don't know how that I don't know how that would have went. That would have been a
Yeah.
completely different experience. So it definitely softened the transition. And yeah, I think I honestly don't even know how I made the friends that I do have from high school, but I did eventually. Like, I don't know when at what point we started being friends, but I did eventually make like a
Yeah.
core group of friends who I'm still friends with today.
That's awesome. Now, were y'all believers then? Were your parents believers? Were you a believer?
No. So my mom has always, as long as I can remember, she was a believer. So she's always
Hmm.
been a strong believer and, church going. The rest of us, my dad, me and my brother, we were always just kind of nominal where, she would manage to get us out to church at various times of the year.
Right.
Or there were certain periods of time where maybe there was maybe a year here or there growing up where maybe we did go to church a little bit more regularly, but for the most part, all of that I can't recall going to church again after probably maybe like sixth grade, seventh grade.
Yeah. Were you angry at God at that time?
No, I don't think so. Honestly, I think that God was not a thought in my mind at all. Like I didn't
Yeah.
even have the thought in my mind to be mad at a God.
Yeah.
It was not a concept in my mind at all.
Well, in one way, that's better. I mean, a lot of people that I know are very hypocritical and they want nothing to do with God. They want nothing to do with Christianity. They want nothing to do with prayer. And then something happens and they're angry at God. So
Mm.
at least it was straight across the board, just God was not on your radar.
Yeah, yeah, just for whatever reason, even though we did go to church sometimes, but for whatever
Yeah.
reason, he was just not even a consideration.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound like you had really met him yet. Because I
Oh, for
remember
sure.
I went to church too. I went to church every Sunday growing up. I didn't receive Jesus as my Lord and Savior until 20 years ago, and I'm 57. So,
Mm,
it's about the real relationship, about really having embracing that He's present and He wants to be, and that your life can be peaceful and free and full and just this different life. Then you don't realize it before you have him. There's really
mhm.
no way to articulate it, is there?
Yeah, yeah. I would say which I'm sure we'll get to, but until I truly met God, I would say I was just like asleep. Like I didn't know what I didn't know. I was just a sleeping person, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was not only asleep, I was actually kind of anti-God.
Mm.
I was more Damascus Road kind of conversion where um, I couldn't understand how people could believe in something like God, because when I did go to church, I never saw people being kind to each other. I saw lots and lots of rules and regulations, but I didn't see that love that
Mhm.
people are supposed to like recognize that we're Christians because of our love. I didn't see much of that.
Yeah. I would say that that actually is probably more of my dad's experience. That
Yeah.
in some of the few conversations I have had with him, I think that he's had a lot of experiences like that where he's not too interested in Christians because from what he's seen, just from church culture and being around churches, because I mean he's at least been around churches, at
Right,
various
right.
points in life, and from what he's seen, he's like, nah, no thanks.
Wow. That's a shame.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned to me during our pre-recording call that culturally showing sadness wasn't something that you typically did. How do you think that that factored into all of the things that you were going through?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely that example that I gave with my mom and basically saying, don't cry. And honestly, I think that that might actually be something that Korean parents typically say to their kids when they're,
Yeah,
what,
yeah,
like, stop crying, basically.
yeah.
So I don't know. I think that that is part of it is just, yeah, maybe it is cultural and it's normal to suppress somewhat suppress our strong emotions, like don't let it all out, don't let people see all of
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
keep it private. um and then I don't know, but some of it might just be me because
Yeah.
my dad and my older brother, they're definitely more expressive emotionally, like
Hmm.
at least in terms of like maybe like having a little bit more of a temper, or I wouldn't even say that they have more of a temper than me, but they're more readily able to express that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
emotion. So I'll give you an example,
Okay.
and forgive me, it's a little bit crude, But so after we got kicked out of the house, at
Uh-huh.
some point later, we were able to go back in and like fully pack our stuff and like truly move out of the house.
Right.
And I have this very, it's kind of funny when I think about it, but I have this very vague recollection of my brother after we had pretty much packed up everything.
Right.
He started urinating in the corner of the room,
Oh my gosh.
like just sort of one last like, forget you guys, right? And so, that is a pretty good example
Yeah.
of the difference between him and I, where
Wow.
he's much more easily able to let that kind of rise to the surface and come out.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I think I've always been a little bit more like keep it inside. And so I don't know
Yeah.
how much to chalk up to culture and how much to chalk up to just my own personality.
Wow. What did you think when you saw him doing that? Were you like silently going, yeah, go for it? Or were you like petrified?
I don't think I was petrified, but I don't know actually. I think I was just like, oh. uh, yeah,
I
I
wouldn't have
think
thought
it
of
was
that, but yeah.
I understood exactly what it meant. So
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think I was
there's
just like, okay,
really, that is a very boiled down, very hardcore image of
yeah,
exactly how he was feeling, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. So at the very least, I knew exactly what he was feeling.
Yes, yes, that's awesome. So when do you think that you did begin to have a faith?
Mhm. Yeah. So honestly, from the time that we stopped going to church, whenever that was, elementary school,
Hmm.
all the way until my senior year of high school, yeah, like I said, God was like literally not even a concept in my mind. Like I didn't think about him at all. I didn't have any questions about the universe or my own
Right.
existence, nothing. But basically, what happened was my senior year of high school, like between my junior and senior year of high school, I would say I had sort of like a blossoming socially, where I started
Hmm.
to make more friends. I started to actually, think about trying to talk to girls, things
Hmm.
like that, right?
Right.
Whereas before that, I had no courage at all to talk to any girl or anything like that. And so, my senior year of high school, there was a girl in one of my classes, and basically I was like, okay, I told my friends, okay, I'm going to ask her to go to the movies. It was the first time I ever asked any girl out ever.
Wow. Okay.
And so, I told my friends, okay, today's the day. I'm going to do it. I saw them at lunch. They're like, so did you do it? It's like, no, I didn't do it. And I was like, okay. If we see her at lunch, I'll do
Hmm.
it. And
Hmm.
so, of course, we go out to lunch, and there she is. She's sitting there with her friend eating at a pizza place. And so I was like, okay, I have to do it now. And so I went up to her, asked her, I was like, hey, do you want to go watch a movie with me on Friday? And she was like, oh, sorry, I can't. I go to church. And so, I don't know. In some sense, this is a very stereotypical story for a lot of guys where,
Right.
they started going to church because a girl that they were interested in uh, was a Christian or invited them to church. So, um, my first reaction, honestly, though, was up until that point, I had never heard of people going to church on any day other than Sunday, right? So,
Yeah.
and so my first reaction was like, "Oh, she's giving me a line. Like she doesn't she doesn't want to go out with me. Like who goes to church on Friday?" Uh, right? So,
Right. I'm washing my hair, Jay. Sorry.
yeah, essentially that's what I thought it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. Oh
But
my
um,
gosh.
but but then she was like, "Well, hey, if you want, you can come with me." And so that is how I went to church. She invited me to go with her, and I went with her on a Sunday morning. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, honestly, at first I was okay. So actually, I need to tell you one other story along with this. Um,
Okay.
so coincidentally, because like I said, God was not even a thought in my mind, but
Right.
about maybe 1 or 2 weeks before getting invited by that girl,
Hmm.
my friends and we were sitting in the parking lot at lunch, and one of my friends, he just all of a sudden decided to ask us, "Hey, you guys, do you guys have any religion? Do you guys believe in anything?" Of course, later on, I found out that he was a Christian, and so
Right.
this is his very subtle way of trying to open up some dialogue. So I
Uh-huh.
give him props for that. But so my friends just all started kind of going around the circle and, oh, I'm a Buddhist, or oh, I'm a
Right.
Christian, or I'm Catholic, whatever. And so it's
Hmm.
kind of coming around to me, and I was thinking about what I'm going to say, and I was like, oh, I mean, I guess I'll say Christian. I mean, my mom's a Christian, and we've gone to church. But
Right.
as it was getting to me, I was like, well, I mean, why would I even say that? Like, I don't go to church, I don't pray, I don't read the Bible, like I don't know anything about being a Christian, right? And
Right.
so I would point to that moment as the very first moment ever in my life that I had any kind of like inkling of a thought like, huh, I wonder if there's a God. And then 2 weeks later, somebody invites me to church, which again,
Wow.
I can't think of any moment before that where anybody ever invited me to church, right? So those two things happen in tight timing. And
They
so,
sure did. I
yeah,
wanted to put a pin right there for a second if we can. So,
yeah.
number one, what did you answer?
I honestly, I don't even remember. I think that I might have said Christian, but honestly,
Okay.
I only remember the thought
The
process, but
question.
I don't even
Yeah.
remember what I said. Yeah.
Okay. And number two, like, was there a part of you that realized, hey, wait a second, that
Mhm.
they are very close in timing, and it just seems very much like the way that God works.
Mhm. I don't think I realized that, but I think it was the catalyst, one of the catalysts, obviously the other catalyst being that, okay, this girl that I'm interested in invited me.
Yeah.
But it did definitely enter my mind. I was like, well, I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day, so maybe I should try to go.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, what happened once you started going? Did you fully engage? Did you just go because you liked her? What was the process?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of both. I'm honestly like definitely the motivation was there since I wanted to spend time with the girl. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, she was going to Friday night youth group. She was going on Sunday morning. So all of a sudden I was going to church 2 days a week also, right? I was going to church on Sunday morning. I was going on Friday night, part of the youth group. And yeah, I just immediately just started engaging and um, yeah, it was weird. For some reason, it's like for some reason once I started going and started hearing the message, I don't know, just like
Hmm.
something inside of me was like, yeah, yeah, this is good. I think this is right. I think this is true. And there wasn't necessarily like a, you know, crazy
Right.
miraculous moment per se,
Right.
but I just once I got there and started hearing about Jesus and the gospel, there was just something inside of me that felt very at home with it. And I was like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think this is right.
That's awesome. Now, do you remember when you actually received Christ?
Yeah. So I think maybe about a month or two into going to church, maybe it was like a couple of months.
Hmm.
They had a youth retreat, like a
Hmm.
winter retreat for the youth. So, go off to some cabin somewhere. And yeah, so and immediately I know everybody's thinking, oh, so you probably went up during like the altar call during the retreat. But the
Hmm.
weird thing is, so as soon as we got to the retreat, like literally the first day when we got there, I just walked off by myself. And then I just prayed and I basically asked Jesus to maybe I don't even know what I prayed. Maybe I asked him to come into my heart, or maybe I asked him to forgive my sins or
Right.
whatever. But I just went off by myself and prayed to accept Christ and then joined back up with everybody else. I don't know what prompted me to do that, honestly.
The Holy Spirit, but that's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's true. Okay, that is
That's
a
awesome.
good theological answer. Yes.
Well, I mean, I think people think you have to accept Jesus in church, and I accepted him in my home. I wasn't anywhere near a church. I wasn't thinking anything about church. I didn't go to church yet.
Yeah.
So I love that that's how you did it.
Yeah,
Now,
God was speaking to you. You didn't need necessarily
yeah,
the church to kind of prompt that for you.
that's right. Now, what was that like for you? Like, who did you tell? Did you have like other friends
Yeah.
at school that were believers? Like, how'd that go?
Well, so okay, I mean, going back to the retreat, so I accepted kind of on that first day, right when we got there, and then we did the retreat, and
Uh,
I still hadn't actually told anybody yet, and
right.
then I think it was the last night of the retreat. We were having like just a kind of like a campfire singing time,
Hmm.
and yeah, we're just sitting there and we're singing worship, and then as we are singing, I started to feel funny, like all of a sudden I was starting to feel these like emotions starting to well up all of a sudden.
Oh, wow.
And it just like came flooding out where, like I said, I'm not very emotional person. Like
Yeah.
I don't express it outwardly very much. And all of a sudden I was just like bawling
Wow.
uncontrollably. And yeah, I didn't. I was like, what is going on? Right. And so, after that, I think that's when I, shared with like some of the leaders and some of my friends, like, oh yeah, actually,
Yeah.
I put my faith in Jesus on the first day of the retreat, and so yeah, so that's when I first told, my Christian friends,
I
and
think
then
that's so beautiful. You went from this place in your past, in your childhood, where you went through this traumatic time and you started crying and you were told, stop it, don't cry.
mhm,
And then when you really felt the result of having accepted Jesus in your life during worship, you
yeah,
cried and it was okay. That's
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, and I think something for me, and maybe other people who are like me who don't typically have much outward emotional response to things. I
Hmm.
think for me, if something does come out, like to me, that's always like an indication, like, oh wow, I really did feel something, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Which I mean shouldn't be the case. Like just because I didn't cry or something like that doesn't mean I didn't really feel it. But sometimes if you're a person like me and those emotions don't really come out very
Yeah.
often, when they do come out, it's like, oh, I really something really happened. Like I was really
Yeah.
feeling something, and
It's
it's kind of almost
powerful.
like, yeah, it's almost like confirmation. Like, oh, something
Hmm.
real happened, and so
Well,
that's kind of
listening to the whole story from kind of a bird's eye view, it really stood out. The two times you talked about bawling, one time you were told to stop, and
mm,
the other time, you were allowed to do it. And it was during like this time where you were feeling close and you were filled with the Holy Spirit, and you were
mhm,
worshiping. And to me, that's just remarkable. It was like God redeemed that place. No, maybe you're not like
mm,
still outwardly emotional a lot, but
yeah.
that was important as a listener to hear that.
Yeah, that's a great connection. Yeah, definitely not a connection that I've ever thought of or seen. But yeah, that's why that's why you're the master.
Well, I'm just listening to what God's showing me about your heart and your story, and
Yeah.
He's the one that's writing it. And I love how He redeems things like that. Now, have your brother and father begun to have a faith of their own yet? I mean, I know you and your mother both do.
Yeah, no, not really. So I would say they're pretty much in the same place where um, my dad is pretty kind of antagonistic about,
Hmm.
not antagonistic, like I mean, he's fine with my mom, being a,
Yeah,
a Christian and going to church and things like that. It's just he has no interest in it whatsoever.
yeah.
And I think he's had some bad experiences. Like, so for instance, just to kind of typify some of the experiences that he's had,
Hmm.
I remember there was, I don't remember how long ago it was, but there was a period where my mom got really sick. I think she was having some liver issues. And
Hmm.
so she got really sick for a while. And basically, somebody from church, and I don't even know who it was, and I don't even know how he heard about it, but somebody from the church basically indicated to him that she was sick because he doesn't go to church. Um,
No way.
yeah. So,
Wow, what is wrong with people?
yeah, it's pretty much the worst thing that you could possibly say to somebody. Yeah. So, and so that kind of typifies, I think, his perspective about Christians.
Oh,
That's
I'm
just,
so sorry that that was his experience. I mean, I
yeah.
understand people like that exist, and that's why we need Jesus. We all are that person in one way or another at some time or another, maybe
Yeah.
just not in that vent. But
Mhm.
um, it's just such a shame how many people are turned away from being open to the love of Jesus because of
Mhm.
the smallness and the brokenness of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ah,
So, yeah, it's definitely a shame.
yeah.
And so he's kind of still in that same place. And my brother, he's not, I wouldn't say he has necessarily like a negative view of
Hmm.
Christians. I think he's just more, he's a very, I think he's just kind of a very real, rational person. And he's like, I
Hmm.
mean, it just hasn't happened for me. Like, and I think he's open to like,
Yeah.
I wish it would, but I just haven't seen anything yet to make me believe.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I know that God is chasing him because some of his friends around him, some guys who you would have never ever thought would ever
Hmm.
become Christians, have in recent
Yeah.
years like
Yeah.
had their lives transformed. So I know that God is circling in on him. But yeah, he's just kind of at a place where it's like, well, I
Yeah.
mean, if it happens, that would be great, but I just haven't seen anything yet. to make me believe
Well, you
that.
know what, Jay, one of my things I do early, like 4:35 in the morning is pray for a whole bunch of different people. A lot of them I don't know. So I'm going to
Mhm.
add them to my
Oh
prayer
yeah.
list because I had worked at one time with an older couple. I used to work with the elderly, and the gentleman was 91 when he passed away. He had been over churched when he was young. He was very wealthy and wanted absolutely nothing to do with Christianity. And I continued to talk with him and pray for him for years. I even had pastors tell me, like, hey, just don't waste your prayers, kind of thing. And like, wait,
Mm.
don't you believe God can do anything?
Yeah, that's another
And they
horrible
were,
thing to say.
I know. And they're like, well, he's in his 90s, And I'm like, yeah, that's why he's still alive. Like, Holy Spirit doesn't give up on you. Jesus doesn't stop loving you, right? So I
Yeah.
continued just like loving him and being there for him, answering any questions he had, showing my character the best that I could, showing Jesus as best as I could. And he ended up getting cancer. I was there to take care of his wife.
Mm.
And he ended up getting cancer and becoming bedridden. And during that time, our conversations turned in such a way that one night about 3 o'clock in the morning, the nurse's aide that was there, who was also a Christian, called me and she said that he was having nightmares and she didn't know what to do, but she felt like God said, put Amanda on the phone. So here I
Mm.
am. I had offered, the prayer for him to pray for Jesus for years. And no, thank you, dear. I'm not right now. I think I'm
Mhm.
okay, whatever. And here I was at 3 o'clock in the morning and pitch black in my living room on the phone. And I did again. And this time he accepted and he prayed along with me. And I thought surely when we got to the point of saying, like, I'm a sinner, that there's no way he was going to say that. And he just
Mhm.
kept going and we got done. And I heard this man, this 91-year-old man that had been running from God for most of his life, offer up his first prayer. And it was so genuine and so raw and so just simple and
Yeah.
real. And don't ever give up, because you know
Mm.
what, until somebody's not here anymore, we should be praying that they'll receive Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. And definitely, yeah, if you would add them to your prayer list, I would be thankful.
Already done. I have a pen in here in the podcast booth. It's already written.
Thank you.
But
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
especially like hearing like the wounds that your dad had. And it
Mhm.
sounds like your brother, God's definitely got some people around him, and evidently, you're in their life as well. So I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure they're watching you
Yeah.
and
Hopefully
listening.
not too closely. Just kidding.
Yeah. So, when did you feel called to pastoral ministry? I mean, how do you think God was
Mhm.
preparing you for that calling?
Yeah. Well, let's see. So I became a Christian my senior year of high school,
Mhm,
and then when I got into college, I mean, I think when I got into college, I was still kind of, I don't know, a little aimless in terms of like I didn't have like any great passion in
mhm,
life. I wasn't pursuing any great career or anything like that. So I was just going to college, and it took me like 5 years to finish my undergrad.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, so when I got into college, one of the things I had a guy at the church who became kind of like a mentor to me,
mhm,
and he did that for a lot of people. But yeah, he kind of took me under his wing, and he taught me how to play the guitar. He taught me how to lead worship, taught me how to study the Bible, and then he eventually taught me how to teach Bible studies, and would
mhm,
constantly be trying to give me opportunities to teach or things like that. And so, as I was doing that, and then also there was a couple at the church as well who same thing, like they would give me opportunities to train with them and teach Sunday school and things like that.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so I think just in the process of doing that more and more, I started to like maybe for the first time in my life have a sense of like, oh, maybe I have some sort of like gifting for this,
yeah,
or and the people around me are starting to kind of affirm like, yeah, yeah, I think you got a gift here, for teaching or whatever.
mhm,
um and so I just kind of kept walking in that, and so I was doing that all throughout college, and getting a lot of like also like leadership opportunities through like the college group and things like that.
mhm,
And yeah, I think probably around maybe the third or fourth year of college, I was like, yeah, I think that Jesus might be calling me into full-time ministry. And I was like, man, I really gotta graduate so that I can go to seminary. And so I think that was the first thing that ever kind of like ignited some
Hmm.
sort of like real passion in me about anything. Like, hey man, you got to get up and start doing something so you can, be a pastor. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of how it happened.
But once you got into ministry, now you were in ministry in the same church for 13 years.
Yes.
And although it was fulfilling and wonderful and had so many beautiful moments, you did say eventually you
Mhm.
felt like ministry, like the experience of ministry, felt a bit like Sisyphus, like
Mhm.
rolling a rock up the mountain for it to roll back down again. Would you elaborate on that? First of all, not everyone knows who Sisyphus is, but
Yeah,
it is basically give us why that would be your choice of explanation.
sure. And honestly, I feel like I'm still very close to my pastoral ministry period of life where I'm still processing even exactly what I was thinking and feeling during that period. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think the experience of ministry, and I don't feel like I had any like truly like bad experiences as a pastor. I
Hmm.
think the vast majority of my experiences are very, very good. And I love being a pastor. But I think a couple of things that kind of came together. One is the aspect that you just described, which is I don't know. And maybe some of it is just worldly ambition, but I think usually as a pastor, leading a ministry, you want to see it grow and you want to see people come to faith
Yeah.
and right, want to grow a church. And I started off basically as pretty much like a youth pastor. Like the core group that I started with was like a group of like 5 or 6 high
Uh-huh.
school and college students, and we just sort of kind of grew up together over the years. Where they became young adults and married and parents, and so there was a core group of people that we stayed together, and as long as we were together, like even though the church wasn't growing, we could still, we loved each other, and we just kind of growing together, and we did ministry together.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, just life happened and some of them started moving away, getting jobs in
Hmm.
different places or, having, life just take them to different places, different cities and different states. And so once that core group started to kind of come apart, I think, yeah, I was just reflecting on, man, I've been doing this for like 13 years and it kind of feels like the ministry is still in the same place and almost going backwards now that kind of this core group is moving away.
Hmm.
Right, like,
Yeah.
and so that would be the Sisyphus part where it's like,
Yeah.
man, I've been really plugging away at this for 13 years and you know is there anything to show for it? And obviously there was, in terms of just the impact on people's lives that were a part of the ministry. And I've had several of them come back to me over the years and say like, hey, those years that we did church together, like was like the most genuine experience of church that they ever had. Like they're still chasing
Wow.
that same
Wow.
experience that they had. So I mean, I don't
Yeah.
want to say that there was no fruit or anything like that. There was lots of fruit in that way, but at the same time, it was kind of like 13 years later.
Hmm.
You what have we accomplished?
Yeah. Well, sometimes too, as God's preparing your heart for a new season, he changes the way you feel about what you're
Mhm.
doing so that you're prepared to let go and move on.
Yeah, I mean, and that could definitely be it. Because so the other thing that was happening during that time, as sort of this core group was kind of going their own ways, is the birth of our first daughter. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so, up until that time, my wife had always been working full time and, I was pastoring full time,
Hmm.
but it was full time work, but not full time pay, if you know what I
Right.
mean.
I
Yeah.
do.
And so, my wife was always kind of, the main breadwinner, her
Hmm.
income was kind of keeping us afloat basically. And so, at that, around that time with the birth of our first child, and she really wanted to be a full-time mom. And
Yeah.
so at that point I kind of so all of these things kind of like you said, maybe those things came together for by God's design, but just kind of the period that we're in, and then my wife really wanted to be a full-time mom, and I just kind of felt like I've been sort of living my dream. You could say, like, I've been living my dream for 13 years of
Yeah,
being a
yeah,
full-time pastor. This is her kind of dream to be a full-time mom. And so, I want to try to make that happen for her. And so basically at that point is when I decided, I'm going to look for like full-time work.
yeah.
And so, there was kind of a transition period of like 2 years where I was, kind of working full-time and then pastoring part-time. And then basically once the most of the kind of the congregation sort of kind of went their separate ways, we at that point we decided, okay, it might be time to kind of close the doors on the church. And
Yeah.
that's when I transitioned to just, full-time working outside the church.
Now, when you went through that process of stepping away in order to provide more financial security and for your wife to be a full-time stay-at-home mom, what feelings did it evoke? Since financial insecurity was an issue when you were a child, do you think God
Hmm.
was working on any areas in your heart at that time?
Um, I'm very close to that period still, so I guess I'm still reflecting on it. But
Right.
yeah, I think I definitely think those things are coming up, in the sense of, I mean, there is definitely that fear of like,
Yeah.
oh, I hope we don't run into financial problems, right?
Yeah.
And kind of, I'm processing it as even as we speak. But yeah, so I think maybe I'll say it like this. I think that I am experiencing for the first time, because
Mhm.
as long as I was being a pastor, basically I wasn't going to make any money. Like that just was the experience for 13 years. Like, and it was kind of accepted. But now that I'm working in just kind of a regular 9 to 5 job, and there's such a thing as raises and reviews and things like that.
Right.
It is an interesting experience of like kind of experiencing, yeah, some of those fears of, hey man, we gotta provide for the family, we gotta
Yeah.
make rent, and then also starting to make more money, and like, oh, this is an interesting feeling of having an income that's growing, and yeah, so I think that I'm starting to enter into the world that probably my parents were in
Yeah.
more now.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was kind of, I don't know, I was just focused on ministry and I wasn't really focused on how much money I was making. And my wife was working and kind of, making the lion's share of money. I wasn't really, we weren't worrying about that. But now I'm kind of starting to enter into that world more.
Right. And you also began entering into it at the same time you became a parent.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, true.
I see again from this bird's eye view, like God saying, okay, what's different this time? Okay,
Hmm.
I'm here. You're aware of me now. I'm with you. You're not alone in this. There isn't any room for fear because I got you.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
At least that's the way it seems to me listening.
Yeah,
how do you
definitely.
how do you feel about that? I mean, do you trust him in that?
Yeah, I mean, I do, but at the same time, there are still, like I said, I feel like I'm currently walking through
Yeah.
these things that, some of my peers, they've probably been walking it for, they've been experiencing it probably for the last, 15 years, after getting out of school and getting married and,
Hmm.
having just regular jobs, so I feel like I'm experiencing these things a little bit later than maybe
Yeah.
some of my peers. But yeah, just learning to trust the Lord with my finances, which I mean, I guess I
Hmm.
was doing for 13 years, but it just feels different now, now that I'm kind of outside of that kind of pastoral world. And
Yeah.
also, yeah, like dealing with worldly success. Like now
Hmm.
that as we slowly make more money, you know, how is that going to impact us? Or, when
Yeah.
I was a pastor, it was easy for me to look at church members and be like, hey, I wonder why they're not more committed, or I wonder why they're not more involved, or, things like that. And then now being on the outside looking in, like, hey, I understand now. I understand some of the pressures of family life, or some of the pressures of work life, and some of the pressures of finances and things like that. Like I have a better understanding of what my congregation members, kind of their experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And now in some of the very, I'm sure, little free time because you have kids and you have a wife and you're working, but
Mhm.
now you're podcasting, and you started off blogging, and it turned into also podcasting. And I believe that that's ministry. I mean,
Mhm.
100%. Can you tell us, like, how did you begin podcasting, especially if you're someone that doesn't think you have a podcaster voice, and you're more of a shy person sometimes? Like, how did
Mhm.
that happen?
Yeah. So I think, like a lot of people, including yourself, during the pandemic is when I started. I started. So I had. Okay, let me take one step back. After stepping away from pastoral ministry,
Hmm.
um, I think I went through like a period of at least a year where I was just like, I've heard from other pastors who, maybe stepped away from ministry, that it was like really hard for them to just kind of be a member of the congregation and just kind of be sitting in the pews.
Right.
And my experience was like completely the opposite, honestly. Like once I was not in pastoral ministry, I was like so happy to just defer to other people. Like you,
Yeah.
you want to, you guys be the leaders. Like I don't want to be the leader, right? And
Yeah.
like I was so just completely content to just be a member and just be sitting in the pews. And yeah, for a long time, and I don't know if it was fatigue. Maybe there's a little bit of hurt. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why, but for that period of at least a year,
Hmm.
I didn't really have even much desire to like engage in really any kind of ministry.
Yeah.
My church was always like, definitely open, like, hey, do you want to preach? Do you want to lead a Bible study? Do you want to lead a small group? And I was kind of always just like, I mean, if you guys need somebody to, I mean, I'm more than happy to help. But like I was like totally fine just not doing anything really.
Yeah.
And so during the pandemic, and I just kind of got this feeling like, well, two things. One is I have always had sort of a secret desire to maybe write a book one day.
Hmm.
Um, and it's funny because I remember when I was in like elementary school, my parents asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up, and I said I want to be a writer, which is weird because I mean, what had I written at that point? Like I don't know what would have
I
possibly
think it's
caused me to
I
say that.
think it's I think it's awesome.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's
It's one of those weird things where, yeah, it's like, I don't know why I said that when I was a little kid, but it was somewhat like in line with, I think, yeah, what God has put in me. And
That's right.
so I've always had like a secret ambition to maybe be a writer one day, but I'm also very like pragmatic where I can't bring myself to spend a lot of energy doing something that I don't know if anybody if it's gonna go anywhere. Like, man,
Uh-huh.
am I really gonna spend all those hours writing a book and have nobody to share it with? And so
Plus all
um,
the editing hours. Don't forget
yeah,
those.
yeah. And so I just decided, what, maybe I should try to like blog at least. And so
Yeah.
that's why I
Hmm.
started blogging on Instagram. Like let's just
That makes sense.
start. I can't commit myself to writing a book, but I can commit myself to writing like some short
Hmm.
devotionals once in a while.
Hmm.
And so I started doing that. And honestly, at first it was just like almost experiment. Like, I wonder how hard it is to get people to follow me on Instagram. But then, as I was doing it, and some people were actually starting to like respond and comment
Yeah.
or even message me about stuff, right? And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, this is actually a ministry, right? I
Yeah.
can't just think of it as an experiment, um, because there's real people out here, and there's definitely
Yeah.
people out here who need to hear about Jesus and who need somebody to give them, even, I mean, I don't think you can pastor somebody over Instagram, but there's still, it's a space that is in need of some pastoral presence.
Absolutely. And there's real connection to be made. People can send you a private message. You can be praying for them or answer questions. And
Mhm.
honestly, there's so much ministry that can be done. And
Yeah.
you can help people get to the point where they can get to a real biblical community, you
Mhm.
know, that's in real life. But I there have just been countless people who I've been able to connect to because of the internet. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed at how many connections I've been able to make through Instagram. Yeah, once I started blogging, then at that point I was like, it wouldn't take that much more work to, you know, make these into podcast episodes. And so that's
Right.
when that's when I just decided to kind of expand the experiment and say, hey, maybe I should try to podcast and see if there's people out there who would want to, listen to these devotionals. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And
That's
I would say,
awesome.
and I would say that this is, yeah, like I said, this is the first time in probably the last, two years where I really started to have that feeling inside of me again, like, uh-oh, I feel like there might be some sort of a little bit of calling to
Mm-hmm.
ministry in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it's the first time I felt that in a
100%.
while.
100%. And it's funny how like God pulls us out of doing something that we think we're supposed to do and we're doing our best at it, but we're not feeling 100% fulfilled anymore, and gets us doing something where the fulfillment comes from realizing, oh, wait, this is what I'm supposed to do. It changes sometimes.
Yeah.
Where you do the ministry sometimes is different than where you think you're going to do it.
Mhm.
And, I didn't think I've never listened to a podcast before I started this. Never.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I tell them that they're like, no way. I'm like, I've heard of them. It
Mhm.
wasn't part of what I did. I was a reader. I wanted to have pages between my fingers and I need to write notes on things. That's just how I am. I
Mhm.
listen to them now, but I didn't then. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that they also told a story in a way that sometimes I could more freely open up to, because I
Yeah.
could be doing something else. And I realize, like, if I'm doing something else, let's say I'm doing laundry or I'm driving or whatever, and I'm listening to a podcast, my walls start to come down because I'm in my everyday life. And I think more stuff gets through.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, not to get into too much ministry talk here, but I think that it's amazing. Yeah, like you said, I'm amazed at how open people are to listening to content on podcasts because, as a
Hmm.
pastor, when you're preaching, one of the pressures is always like, how long is the sermon, right? And,
Right.
kind of the prevailing wisdom is like, man, once you get
Hmm.
past 20 or 30 minutes, like people
Hmm.
are starting to check out, you really got to keep it kind of in that window.
Hmm.
But then at the same time, it's like, man, people are consuming like multiple podcasts a week that are like an hour long, right? And
Yeah.
so just the disparity in how much people are able to or willing to open themselves to content on podcasts, I think is something also that I recognize like as a potential, like, man, there's a lot of opportunity here.
There is. And it's funny. I have some friends who they weren't friends before they started listening, but people that I talk back and forth with who listen to my podcast, who will say, hey, you keep me company when I'm taking a run.
Mm,
Or, I look forward to who you're going to have on because I know where you're coming from. Or it sounds like I'm just listening to two friends talking on the phone, and for some reason that's really just
mhm,
encouraging to me. And
mhm,
so we're giving people this avenue, especially when you do interviews, I think, more this avenue to kind of be looking in, listening in on something, and we're getting to show through our stories that God was there, that God was
mhm.
faithful, and that God is working. And I think subliminally it starts to help them understand, oh, wait a minute, maybe he's there for me too.
Mm, yeah.
Now, you weren't always doing interviews. You started off, I believe, just doing shorter podcasts, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I really I just started off honestly reading the devotionals that I was writing on Instagram. And so it's like, I mean, I could just read this, right? And it's an
Right.
episode. And so I
Yeah.
started off doing that. But really what I was passionate about in terms of the podcast, what I wanted to get to was
Hmm.
doing the interviews and really,
Yeah.
because I don't know that I'm necessarily like a great orator, but I think if I do have a strength, I think I'm good at creating dialogue and asking
Yeah.
people questions
Hmm.
and kind of maybe approaching topics with a very fair mind and kind of being open to whatever perspectives are on the table. And so I think that's why I really wanted to get to the interviewing, but I sort of needed to gain some confidence first. Like, do I
Yeah.
actually know how to do this podcasting thing? And then once
Yeah.
I felt like, okay, I know how to do this, then I kind of started the foray into more topical interviews.
Well, I listen to your podcast and I've been on your podcast, and I think that those things that you said are true. I think everything you said about what you wanted to be and what you think your strengths are true. I
Thank you.
think that getting to do an interview is so wonderful, because even when you have questions prepared ahead of time, even when you think you know what you're going to talk about, conversation can take a turn at any moment. And something new could have happened to that person today, or something new happened to you that you feel really goes with the conversation and you share. And so to me, it's this beautiful joining together that other people are experiencing. It's real, it's
Hmm.
organic, and they know
Yeah.
it's not just some canned thing.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the draw as well, because people are really lacking community and connection.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's a really good point, the community and connection aspect, and which is why it's probably much more pleasant to listen to a conversation rather than
Yeah.
just, a sermon. I'm not to say that sermons are bad, and
No, sermons
sermons
are
are
great,
important, yeah, but
but
yeah,
it's
there's something
different.
about a conversation that is, yeah, it hits you in a different way.
Yeah, and if you're in the middle of a conversation, then I think when it's genuine, and it's not forced, you feel like you're part of it. You're thinking along with it. You're going, yeah, I didn't think about that, or oh, I was thinking that happened to him, and so you're part of it, just like watching a TV show or anything
Mhm.
like that. You become part of what's going on, and you feel connected. When you're in a sermon, you're connected to what's going on, but it's different, and you're sitting there and you're quiet and you have to stay still, and you know
Yeah.
you can't sit there with your cinnamon roll and your coffee. In some churches you can, but
Yeah.
it's just different. You can't be doing whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
um
Dude, I just had a great revelation. We should start asking people to bring their laundry to church and fold it during the sermon. Dude, the
it's
sermon could be an hour.
awesome. That I'm telling you,
It's a
that's great.
revolution.
That's awesome. So as you continue on in podcasting, what are your hopes?
Um, I think that I hope to continue to engage in topics that are relevant to people. And actually, I'm trying to do more so this year, like
Yeah.
really dive into topics that I think people are really thinking about. And as a host, I think my aim is to be a proxy for them, to really try to ask the questions that they would want to ask.
Yeah.
So if I can be that proxy and not only bring up topics that they care about, but make sure that I ask the questions that they probably would ask if they were, interviewing that person, so that
Yeah.
people can, and I think for me, I'm very comfortable with uncertainty. That
Hmm.
I don't feel like every episode has to end with we got to the bottom of it and here's the answer, right? That's yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sometimes I think it's just as important just to say this is an important topic to people. Here are some relevant perspectives. Here's the relevant scriptures. Here's
Yeah.
some possible ways that you can think about this. We don't know if 100% like exactly what everybody needs to think about this, but at least we had a sincere dialogue about this important topic, and that's my
Yeah.
goal.
I think that's 100% correct. And I think the sincerity is the big factor, the thing to underline. And I also think it's really important to realize that for me, I will share anybody's story, because
Mhm.
what I want people to understand is that your story matters, that your
Mhm.
story has purpose. And I can't tell you how many people who maybe don't have a big platform, they're not already in ministry, but they have a story to share, don't think they have a story.
Mhm.
And I think every story is beautiful. I think every story is handcrafted, and it may have some difficulties and some traumatic things that certainly God did not orchestrate nor want to have happen, but He was with you in them. And I think that when we share them and we're vulnerable and real about it, that people can get to see the character of God. And the more stories we share, the more complete their vision of who he really is becomes.
Mm. Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's a shame when people are afraid to share or don't think they have anything valuable. Every story is valuable, every single one. And
Mm.
your story is going to reach people that my story isn't. And God's
Mm.
already figured out who those people are, and he's already set it all up, and it's going to go there. And that's
Mm.
all we need to know. We don't have to do anything else but tell it.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen.
Now, I'm going to ask you now, my last question. If you listen to the podcast, everyone knows this is my favorite question. I just love the answers. They're always so good. So if you could go back and share any advice with your younger self, what would it be?
Hmm. I think if I was going to give my younger self some advice, I think I would just want to reassure me that God's got it, that God's got you,
Yeah.
and to not be so worried. I think I have a tendency to be a worrier. I tend to have a tendency to be a little bit of a fearful person,
Mhm.
anxious, and so yeah, I think I would just try to reassure myself, like, hey, you know what? God's got you. Even though there are going to be many points where you don't know exactly what's happening, like
Mhm.
God is in control and he's going to take care of you guys. And that's kind of what I like I said, I'm comfortable with uncertainties, so I still feel like I'm in the middle of my sort of pastoral ministry story. Like I don't actually know what the
Yeah.
ending of that part of this story is, but I do see when I look over, and especially as you kind of given me this opportunity to reflect over my life, like I see, yeah, there were a lot of like bumps and there were a lot of like very kind of uncertain, scary periods. But at the same time, I have to admit, man, God always had our back. Like God always took care of us.
Yeah.
Um, we were never in want, really. I mean, even though, yeah, I mean, our lifestyle changed and, we went from being pretty well to do to, not maybe not always having things, or like there was this one time when my dad, I think I was in high school and my dad was like, hey, you can ask us for things. Like, because I think after the financial problems, like I just stopped asking them for stuff. He's like, dude,
Oh,
you need to ask us for things. Like, you can ask us for things, right? And
wow.
so, there were periods, definitely many periods um, of lack, and even in our married life, like during the ministry years,
Hmm.
where the bank account was low or below negative. But at the
Right.
same time, I have to admit, man, I mean, God is taking care of us, and man, we've always had enough.
Yeah.
And even now, like I mean, I look at like, I mean, I had like a major career change, right? From being a pastor for 13 years and having no work experience to now, I mean, he set me up in a great company and I'm working and, making a decent salary. And it's like, how does that happen? I have no qualifications. I have no work experience,
The
but
favor of
God is,
God.
yeah,
The favor of
God is taking
God.
care of us.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
what I
He
would
is
tell
good.
myself.
That's That's amazing advice. And yeah, he is good, and he's always going to be good.
Mm.
And it's that age old, are we going to look down at the circumstances, at the waves, or are we going to look up at Jesus?
Mm.
It's really difficult sometimes. And everything in our flesh is going to tell us to look at the circumstances and to worry. And it's just that, I guess that's why it's in the Bible so many times not to do it.
Yeah.
Um, but that's what biblical community is about too. We need each other to help each other in those moments, to have other people hold you accountable or encourage you in going back to what God says to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. People always say, hey, you're not supposed to worry. God said not to worry. But I see it as a parent. If I told my kid 100 times not to worry, it's probably because I know that they're going to worry a lot.
That's right. That's right. That's very, very wise. That's absolutely right. Great perspective. Well, Jay, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today. I was really, really encouraged by our conversation, and really appreciate your coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Amanda. I really appreciate it.
And now you can say you've been a podcast guest, and I'm sure You will do it many more times. It gets easier every time. Was it too bad?
No, it was great.
Okay, awesome.
You made it very easy for me, so I appreciate it. So
Awesome.
yeah, sorry. I think we went long. So if you need to do some trimming on this interview, feel free to do
See,
so.
that's the thing. You just got done talking about the difference in podcasting. There is no such thing as long. Every story lasts as long as it lasts, and
Okay,
that's just the way it goes. The
nice.
people that listen are going to listen until you're finished.
Nice. Well, I appreciate it. Now I can, anytime anybody wants to know more about me, I'll just be like, here, listen to this episode from this podcast.
Easy peasy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I hope you have an amazing day. You're in California, so you still have more day ahead of you than I do.
Yeah.
I hope it's wonderful. And thanks again for joining me.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. You know, if you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.